Dinner that evening in Accra should have been quiet and ordinary, but it turned into the moment that changed everything. Amma sat across from her husband, Kwame, the plates between them filled but barely touched. She had been telling him about the small steps she was taking toward her dream, her voice carrying a mix of hope and nervous excitement. Instead of encouragement, Kwame leaned back, smirked, and said words that landed like a slap. "You're lucky I married you. No one else would want a woman like you." The table went silent. Amma's fork rested in her hand, but she couldn't lift it. Her chest tightened, her stomach burned, and for a moment she wondered if she had heard him wrong. But the smug look on his face told her she hadn't. He believed it. He wanted her to believe it too. She didn't argue. She didn't throw her glass or raise her voice. She just sat there, her lips pressed together, her eyes fixed on the plate in front of her. On the outside, she looked calm, almost defeated. But inside, a storm had begun to gather. Kwame thought he had silenced her, as he often did with his sharp remarks and careless mockery. But this time was different. Amma's silence wasn't weakness. It was planning. Each cruel word of his was fuel, sparking a fire she would no longer ignore. She knew, right there at that dinner table, that one day he would regret underestimating, and she promised herself she would make that day come. Before that night at the dinner table, Amma's life had already been full of quiet sacrifices that no one seemed to notice, least of all Kwame. Long before he wore nice suits and carried himself like a man of importance, it was Amma who carried the heavier load. She remembered those days at Makola Market, standing under the hot Accra sun, selling the jewelry she made by hand. Beads strung carefully, earrings shaped with love and patience. Each piece sold not just to feed herself, but to put something aside for their future. She would smile at customers even when her feet ached, even when her stomach growled from skipping meals to save a little extra money. When Kwame dreamed of going back to school, it was Amma who made it possible. She packed food in small containers and sold them. She haggled over prices. She worked late into the night making jewelry by candlelight. Every sadi she earned, she stretched until it felt like magic. He studied while she sacrificed. He wore new shoes to class while she walked in worn-out sandals. But she didn't complain. She told herself this was love, that one day he would look back and see how much she gave up to see him rise. There were nights when she went to bed hungry so he could eat. Days when she turned down opportunities because the family needed her at home. She learned how to smile through exhaustion, how to nod through dismissive comments from relatives who wondered why Kwame had married just a market woman. Amma swallowed her pride more times than she could count, telling herself her moment would come later. But later never came, not in the way she imagined. When Kwame finished school and started to find success, Amma thought it would finally be her turn to be seen, to be appreciated. Instead, he grew colder. The man she had supported began to act as if she were beneath him, as if her sacrifices had been nothing more than duties. He never once said, "Thank you." Never once reminded people of the woman who had stood by him when he had nothing. The weight of that neglect was heavier than any market basket she had ever carried. Each unkind word from Kwame cut deeper because it ignored the years she had given to him, years that could never come back. Yet, despite the hurt, Amma stayed quiet because silence had become her shield. She had learned that shouting her worth to a man who refused to see it was like pouring water into a basket. But deep inside, she knew something was shifting. Every memory of a meal skipped, every late night at the market, every bead strung in hope. It was no longer just sacrifice. It was fuel. And when the day came for her to rise, those years of silent struggle would become the story of her strength. While Kwame slept peacefully at night, convinced his wife was simply worn out from her ordinary day, Amma was quietly building the future he never imagined. Long after the house fell silent, she would sit at the small wooden table with her laptop glowing in the darkness. That light became her secret companion, her weapon, her window to a world much larger than the one Kwame tried to box her into. She studied like a student chasing her last chance. Tutorials, online courses, articles about business, technology, and renewable energy filled her nights. Sometimes her eyes burned from staring at the screen too long, but she pushed on, fueled by determination and the memory of every insult Kwame had thrown her. He thought she was powerless, but Amma knew better. Knowledge was her power, and she was gathering it quietly, piece by piece. Through social media and business forums, she began to connect with people far beyond Accra. Investors in Cape Town, engineers in Lagos, mentors in Nairobi. She reached out, asked questions, shared her ideas. Most ignored her at first, but a few responded. And those few became the foundation of something extraordinary. Amma didn't do it alone. Slowly, she built a small team of bright young minds who believed in her vision for clean energy. They met virtually, brainstormed, argued, laughed, and worked until late hours. Together, they designed a project that could change lives, not just in Ghana but across Africa. Each night, Amma moved closer to turning her dream into something solid, something unstoppable. Her silence became her greatest shield. By day, she endured Kwame's mockery and the dismissive looks of family members who saw her only as a wife and market woman. By night, she was a strategist, a leader, and a builder of dreams. Kwame never suspected a thing. He thought her tired eyes were from housework, her quietness from defeat. He had no idea that behind her calm face, she was preparing a storm big enough to shake the very ground he stood on. Sometimes, when she finally shut her laptop at dawn, she would pause and smile to herself. She pictured the day when all this work, all the sleepless nights, would come to light. A day when Kwame's mocking laughter would be silenced, not by her words, but by her success. Every email sent, every pitch refined, every connection made was a silent step toward that day. Amma wasn't just dreaming anymore. She was building stone by stone in secret, in silence. And though nobody else could see it yet, she knew she was on her way to something far greater than the life she had been told to accept. Her laptop was more than a machine. It was her sword, and with it, she was writing the beginning of her victory. The family gathering was supposed to be a cheerful one. Laughter, food, and chatter filled the compound as uncles, aunts, and cousins caught up with each other. Amma moved quietly among them, serving plates, checking on the children, and keeping her smile soft but polite. She wasn't loud or showy, but she carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you're working on something bigger than yourself. Kwame, however, had other plans. He enjoyed the spotlight, and gatherings like this gave him the perfect stage. With a drink in hand and relatives gathered around, he began to boast about his job, his accomplishments, and how hard he worked to provide. Nobody noticed Amma slip into the circle, standing just behind him, listening. Then, with a smirk, he dropped the words that stung the most. "You know, Amma here thinks she's a businesswoman," he said, laughing as if it were the funniest joke in the world. "She should just be grateful I put food on her table." The words hung heavy in the air. A few people chuckled nervously, others exchanged glances. Some whispered behind their hands. Amma saw the smirks, the pity in a cousin's eyes, the way an aunt shook her head as if to say, "Poor girl, she doesn't know her place." In that moment, the humiliation was sharp and undeniable. Her face grew warm, her chest tight, but she didn't argue. She didn't shout back or try to defend herself. Instead, she stood still for a second, her eyes meeting Kwame's. He thought he had embarrassed her, reduced her to silence in front of everyone. What he didn't know was that her silence was no longer weakness. It was strength. Amma placed the glass she was holding on the table, smoothed the fabric of her dress, and walked away without a single word. Heads turned to watch her leave, some shaking with disapproval, others filled with confusion. Kwame laughed louder, as if her quiet retreat proved his point. But Amma's walk wasn't one of defeat, it was one of restraint. Inside, she burned, but the fire wasn't destroying her anymore. It was shaping her. As she stepped into the night air, she breathed deeply, letting the sting of the moment settle into her bones. Instead of crushing her, it only fueled her resolve. She thought of the late nights with her laptop, the team who believed in her, the investors who had started to listen. Soon, very soon, she wouldn't need to explain herself. Her work would speak louder than any insult Kwame could throw. Amma knew that the same family who smirked and whispered would one day sit in silence, ashamed of how quickly they had believed his version of her story. She didn't need to argue tonight. Her time was coming, and when it did, no laughter, no whisper, and no insult would ever be able to silence her again. That night, after the family gathering, Amma returned home with her heart heavy, but her spirit unbroken. The words Kwame had thrown at her still echoed in her mind, mixed with the whispers and pity of her relative. She sat alone in the quiet of her room, her laptop on the desk, the hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. She was tired of being laughed at, tired of carrying so much on her shoulders, but she was not done. Then her phone rang. The number flashing on the screen was unfamiliar, but she knew it was international. Her pulse quickened as she answered, her voice steady though her hands trembled. On the other end was the investor from Cape Town, the one she and her team had worked so hard to impress. His words came clear and certain. "Amma, your pitch has been approved. We're ready to move forward. The deal is for $100 million. For a moment, she could not breathe. Her eyes filled with tears, her hands pressed against her chest as if to steady her racing heart. $100 million. Not just numbers on paper, but validation of every sleepless night, every quiet sacrifice, every moment she had swallowed her pain instead of shouting it. She tried to respond, to sound professional, but her voice cracked with emotion. She thanked him, promised to deliver, and ended the call. Then, alone in that small room, she let herself weep. Not out of sadness, but from pure triumph. Every insult, every smirk, every dismissive laugh she had endured had led to this moment. Amma closed her eyes and remembered the days at Makola Market, stringing beads while her stomach growled. She remembered the nights Kwame mocked her for wasting time on her computer. She remembered the humiliation of standing in a room full of family, called unworthy by the man she had once sacrificed everything for. And now, here she was, holding in her hands the future none of them believed she could have. The deal wasn't just about money. It was proof. Proof that her ideas had value. Proof that her silence had been strategy, not weakness. Proof that she was capable of more than anyone dared to imagine for her. She wiped her tears and opened her laptop again, sending a quick message to her team. It's done. We got it. Within minutes, her phone buzzed with replies, cheers, emojis, voice notes filled with excitement. They celebrated with her, even from miles away, because they too understood what this moment meant. Amma sat back, a smile breaking through her tears. Tonight, Kwame thought he had humiliated her, but life had given her the sweetest reply. The world was finally opening its doors to her, and she was ready to step through with her head high. This was not just a win, it was the beginning of her freedom. The morning after that life-changing call, the house felt strangely calm. The sun was just rising over Accra, painting the sky with soft gold, when Kwame stirred awake. He expected to see Amma in her usual house clothes, moving about quietly, maybe preparing breakfast. But instead, what he saw made him sit up in bed, confused. Amma stood in front of the mirror, dressed sharply in a tailored suit he had never seen before. Her hair was neatly styled, her face glowing not with makeup alone but with a confidence he hadn't noticed in years. In her hands were a stack of neatly arranged papers, clipped and organized, like something from the offices he always bragged about. Kwame frowned, rubbing his eyes. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice heavy with sleep but sharpened with curiosity. Amma turned slowly, her expression calm, almost serene. She didn't rush her words. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at him and said, "I'm going to finalize a deal bigger than anything you'll ever touch." For a moment, Kwame laughed, thinking it was one of her little dreams again, the kind he loved to dismiss. But then he heard a sound from outside, the smooth purr of a luxury car engine. He pulled back the curtain and froze. Parked neatly in front of the house was a sleek black car with a chauffeur waiting by the door. The man wasn't there for him. He was there for Amma. Amma walked past Kwame, her heels clicking against the floor with steady rhythm. She didn't look flustered or nervous. She looked like someone who already belonged to another world, a world he had never let her enter. Kwame's mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. She paused at the door, turning her head slightly. "Don't wait up," she said softly. Not cruel, not mocking, just a statement of truth. Then she stepped outside, the morning light wrapping around her like a crown. The chauffeur opened the car door respectfully, and Amma slid inside with the confidence of a woman stepping into her destiny. The car pulled away slowly, leaving Kwame standing at the window, still in his crumpled sleep clothes, watching the wife he had belittled drive off into a future he couldn't even imagine. Inside the car, Amma held her papers close and allowed herself a small smile. This was the morning she had dreamed of during countless nights of hard work. This was the moment she had pictured whenever Kwame's insults tried to crush her spirit. Now finally it was real. The silence in the bedroom she left behind was heavier than any insult Kwame had ever thrown at her. Because deep down he knew, he was no longer the center of Amma's story. She had outgrown him, and there was no turning back. The boardroom in Johannesburg was nothing like anything Amma had ever stepped into before. The space was grand, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in streams of bright light, polished wooden tables that seemed to stretch endlessly, and leather chairs filled with powerful people who had flown in from across the world. Cameras lined one side of the room, journalists ready with pens and recorders, waiting to capture history in the making. Amma sat at the head of the table, her tailored suit sharp, her posture steady. The papers in front of her were more than documents. They were the proof of years of sacrifice, silence, and secret nights of work. She glanced down at the contract, the bold figure staring back at her. $100 million. Her project, her vision, her fight. It had all led to this. The lead investor cleared his throat, smiling warmly. "Amma, we're honored to back your renewable energy project. Africa needs leaders like you." His words carried weight, but Amma's heart was calm. She didn't feel like the nervous girl at Makola Market anymore. She felt like the woman she had always known she could be. She picked up the pen slowly, her fingers steady despite the excitement building inside her. Cameras flashed the moment the ink touched the page. With every stroke of her signature, the room seemed to shift. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about rewriting the story of who she was and what she represented. As the final page was signed, applause broke out. Journalists scribbled furiously, photographers leaned in for better shots, and somewhere outside the boardroom, her name began to trend across social media. Amma Mensah, the market woman's daughter turned mogul. Amma leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. For years, Kwame and others like him had told her she was unworthy, that her dreams were foolish. Yet here she was in a foreign city, sealing one of the biggest deals in the region. It wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. It was grit, persistence, and the fire that came from being underestimated too many times. After the signing, she stood to give a few words. Her voice was clear, steady, and warm. This project is more than business. It's about changing lives, giving light to communities, and proving that no dream is too small to grow big. I thank my team, my partners, and every person who believed when it was hardest to believe. The applause was louder this time, echoing off the tall glass walls. Amma smiled, not just for the cameras, but for herself. She thought of her younger self at Makola Market, stringing beads with tired hands. She thought of every sacrifice, every insult, every quiet tear. And then she thought of the future, bright, open, waiting. When she walked out of that boardroom, flashes followed her, voices called her name, and the world finally saw what she had always known deep inside. Amma had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. Kwame was in the living room one morning, sipping his tea and flipping through the newspaper, when the radio announcer's voice caught his attention. The headline was bold, delivered with excitement. Ghanaian woman signs a $100 million deal in Johannesburg. Amma Mensah's renewable energy project is set to transform the future of Africa. The cup nearly slipped from his hand. For a second, he thought he had misheard. Amma. His Amma. The same woman he had mocked, belittled, and dismissed? The announcer went on, describing her as a visionary, a rising mogul, the daughter of a market woman who had broken barriers and made history. Kwame froze, his chest tightening as if the walls were closing in. He had always been so sure she was nothing without him, so sure that her dreams were too small, too foolish. Yet here was the world celebrating her name, and not once was his mentioned. The shock quickly turned into something heavier, shame. Later that day, as he walked through the neighborhood, people greeted him with wide smiles, clapping him on the back. Your wife is amazing, Kwame. You must be so proud. You married a powerful woman. Neighbors who had once only seen him as the important one now saw Amma as the star. Their congratulations cut him deeply, because he knew the truth. He had never supported her, never believed in her, never even respected her. The real blow came at the next family gathering. The same uncles and aunts who had smirked and whispered when Kwame mocked Amma now couldn't stop praising her. Amma is a genius. Her project will change lives. She's put her family name on the map. Cousins who once pitted her now crowded around, asking her questions, wanting advice, eager to be seen beside her. Amma moved through the room with quiet grace, answering politely, smiling gently, never showing bitterness. She didn't bring up the humiliation they had piled on her before, didn't remind them of the laughter and whispers. She didn't need to. The shift in the air said it all. Respect had finally arrived, and it was heavy. Kwame sat in a corner, his hands clenched together, watching the scene unfold. The woman he once told to be grateful for a place at his table now commanded the entire room without raising her voice. Every compliment aimed at her was a reminder of his failure to see her worth. Every cheer for her success was a mirror reflecting his arrogance back at him. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be silent, not in power, but in shame. He couldn't laugh, couldn't boast, couldn't even meet her eyes, because deep inside, he knew he had underestimated the woman he once called lucky. The truth was clear to everyone now. She had never needed his luck. It was he who had been lucky, and he had thrown it away. The gala after the signing was nothing short of dazzling. The ballroom glowed with golden light, crystal chandeliers sparkled above, and the sound of clinking glasses filled the air. Powerful men and women from across Africa and beyond mingled in elegant suits and gowns. Amma stood among them, no longer the quiet wife from Accra who once sold beads at Makola Market, but the star of the night. As the evening unfolded, the host tapped the microphone and announced Amma. The room grew still. All eyes turned to her, waiting. Cameras were raised, journalists ready to capture her every word. Amma walked gracefully to the stage, her long dress sweeping behind her, her presence commanding without effort. She paused for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces, then began to speak. Her voice was calm but carried strength. For years, she said, people told me I was lucky. Lucky to be married, lucky to have a home, lucky to have someone put food on my table. She paused, her eyes steady, her words hanging in the silence. But I want to tell you tonight, no woman is lucky to be disrespected. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones lit up as people began recording. Amma's words were bold, unapologetic, and true. She went on, her tone steady and sure. We are not ornaments to decorate someone's life. We are not meant to be silenced or hidden. We are builders, we are dreamers, we are leaders. Our worth is not decided by who chooses to see it. It is decided by what we create, what we give, and what we dare to imagine. The hall erupted with applause, loud and long, echoing off the golden walls. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, shouting her name. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Her words cut through more than the room. They cut across the world, carried instantly through social media as clips and quotes spread like wildfire. Within minutes, her line became a movement online. No woman is lucky to be disrespected. It was repeated, shared, turned into hashtags, posters, and headlines. Women across Africa and beyond claimed it as their own, using it to speak their truths. Amma stood on that stage, the applause washing over her, but she didn't smile in triumph alone. She smiled because she knew this was bigger than her. She wasn't just telling her story. She was giving voice to millions of women who had been silenced, mocked, or underestimated. As the night went on, people lined up to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her how her words had touched them. But Amma stayed humble, her heart steady. She knew the work had only begun. Still, in that moment, under the glow of the chandeliers and the roar of applause, she had shown the world the true meaning of power. Power born not from luck, but from resilience, courage, and fire. Amma's victory was never the end. It was only the beginning. After signing the historic deal, she could have chosen to sit back and enjoy her wealth. But Amma knew her success had to mean more than herself. She remembered the girl she once was, stringing beads in Makola Market, and she remembered the millions of girls across Africa who still carried that same struggle. So she decided to build something greater. She opened schools for girls in rural areas, giving them access to education that had once felt like a distant dream. She poured money into women-led startups, offering funding and mentorship to young entrepreneurs who only needed a chance to shine. She became a voice for empowerment, speaking at global conferences, pushing for change, and reminding the world that African women were not silent figures in the background. They were leaders shaping the future. Everywhere she went, people repeated her words. No woman is lucky to be disrespected. They became more than a quote. They became a movement. Amma had turned her pain into power, her silence into a megaphone for millions. And while her name grew across Africa and beyond, Kwame's faded into the shadows. He became a quiet figure in her story, remembered only as the man who once underestimated. Amma never wasted time seeking revenge. Her success was enough. In the final scene, Amma stood at one of the schools she built, surrounded by laughing girls in bright uniform. She smiled, her eyes shining, knowing that respect had never been handed to her. She had earned it, fought for it, and built it with fire. Her legacy wasn't just wealth. It was the future she created for others.